Round 5 team lists and the NRL Fantasy implications of those. That's what we're going to be going through today, all 16 team lists. To introduce myself, my name's Longy. I'm a previous winner of NRL Fantasy, won the overall prize in 2013. So I'm here to help you look for some of those inside scoops in these team lists, some of the big opportunities that could win you your league, and potentially some of the traps as well that look like good options but really aren't. So first up here, we've got the Roosters and the Eels, and just going to be a cracking game in terms of real NRL. I'm excited to be at this one as a para fan. From a fantasy perspective, there's still a lot of people in our DMs who own James Tedesco, they've gotten rid of Brandon Smith most of the time. People who are looking at like Sam Walker, Joey Manu, potentially even Lindsay Collins there as well. They're probably the fantasy relevant guys for the Roosters. I wouldn't worry too much about this bench. The Roosters don't use that bench too heavily. And there's a bit of word that Angus Crichton's back at training as well. So just be wary of that when you're looking at these bench players for the Roosters or even the edge backer options there as well. In terms of the Roosters, if you've got a James Tedesco or you've got someone else there, probably worth holding at this stage. A guy like Tedesco, he's dropped $100,000 already, so I would hold on to him, but I wouldn't be rushing to buy many of these players here. Sam Walker, he's interesting, but there are a lot of good halves around that price that are a bit better. And then a Drew Hutchison is a total mirage, so don't be getting Drew Hutchison. He had a great round 1 performance for fantasy, but he's only going to be there for a week, and he's just not that guy for fantasy. In terms of the Eels, Clint Gutherson there, a bit of word that he may be ousted as the number 1 for Parramatta, or they might get a hybrid option there with, RTS or Jaden Campbell or someone like that playing alongside Gutho in the team, and potentially both those guys playing number 1. But for the Eels, looking through this team, the interesting part of this team is either in the halves or in the back row. So for the halves, you've got Dylan Brown. He comes in around 680,000. He's interesting with his base stats and like run meters there. The risk is that he doesn't really kick the ball. So you're missing out on a base stat area that some other guys like Shaun Johnson at that price really dominate. Then you got Mitch Moses, who set the kick meter record because Dylan Brown doesn't kick. So he had 1,000 kick meters fairly recently, which is absolutely insane. But he's in great form for fantasy as well. The other guy I'll point out here, and we might just jump into a different tab here, is Ryan Matterson. And Ryan Matterson's at $775,000. You've also got a monster pod there, 0.06% owned. Scored a 68 last week. And the important part about this score was, look at this stat line. 58 tackles, 2 misses, 146 meters gained. No flair there. Ryan Matterson was one of the top offloaders in the game last year. So you can count on him to have a couple of offloads a game normally. That's about 8 points. And then you've got some attacking stats as well. He's a guy who gets kicked for, runs a decent line. He can definitely set up a player on his outside, especially when he's playing on that edge role too. So Matterson has a lot of upside. Played all 83 minutes in his return too. He played across the middle and the edge, depending on when Doueihi was on the field. And yeah, he's a juicy little pod there for Parramatta. Going through the back row, Bryce Cartwright, keep on him, keep holding on. Shaun Lane will be back fairly soon, so that may come to an end soon, but don't cash out Cartwright too early. And Jermaine Hopgood is still that guy. He had a great performance last week, so nothing to worry about there. But I probably would be wary of captaining him. No Junior Polo on the surface. It looks like something that might create more points for Hopgood, but I think in reality it means that Hopgood will be doing more of those tough runs that Junior was doing before, so could be a negative for him there. If you got Matt Doueihi, he had a great performance last week, but he's coming off the bench, so I wouldn't be trying to start him in the 17, but he may still make you a bit more money. Might be worth holding on to. And Werner McGreig at number 10 there for Parramatta, total mirage. He's been playing about 15 minutes a game at the most for Parramatta so far. He's got 2 weeks with Junior out. They've been running Murchie in the middle. Makatoa's on that bench. And even when Doueihi comes on, Matterson goes to the middle as well. So Greg might produce a couple of 30-point games, but he's just not worth the money. And you'll have a bit of a dead spot in your roster if you go with Greg. Next up here, we've got the Raiders and the Panthers. Juicy game here. The Raiders really struggled without Fogarty last week, and they've got no Jack White in this week as well. For fantasy, the interesting guy here is Matt Timoko. So he's had a bit of a fortnight of footy. So I'd go Timoko, and I'd also go Hudson Young as the two really interesting guys. And then you could look at Joe Tapine as one of those guns as well. Let's jump into a few of these guys for pricing. First up, Hudson Young. Still a massive pod at 1.2% owned. He's 631,000, which is a bit weird when you look at his scoring, he's gone 60 plus the last 2 weeks, but he scored about 15 points a week before that. So Hudson Young, he's kind of value. I mean, he's dropped about $150,000 so far this year. I wouldn't expect him to kill Penrith personally, but $150,000 discount on his round one price. He did score 14 tries in 2022, so can he repeat that is a bit of a question. If you think that Hudson Young can repeat that, then he's definitely underpriced, but I think there are better options around that $631,000 mark. But at the same time, Hudson Young, if things went right, Hudson Young is the kind of pod or the kind of difference player that could actually win you fantasy. So, these guys pop up every week, those difference makers that could win you the league or could put you way back. I think Hudson will put you way back, but there is a case to be made that he could also just go on a tear here. The other guy to look at is Matt Timoko. And he had 56 points last week. I think he had about 65 the week before that. Really on a tear, really increasing in value. It looks like he's taken that leap that young centers sometimes take where they sort of go to that next level. So he could be a guy to have. I mean, 46 average there. Not too many attacking stats in there either. He's made a few nice attacking plays. But, yeah, he could be good if you think Canberra might be all right. And 1.4% owned is really, really low. For the Panthers, I mean, we've got to talk about Nathan Cleary. So Nathan Cleary versus Nicho Hynes is a big conversation point this week. We're going to have a video that goes into that in a bit more depth, but you're paying a lot less for Nathan Cleary right off the bat. So we jump across to this with Cleary, $878,000. You're down $79,000 from the start of the year. So $878 compared to Hynes, who is now $1 million. Now, those guys started at about the same price this year. And there's not that much to suggest that they will be that different. So Hynes won the Dally M last year. He played amazingly against the Dragons. But are you really thinking that Hynes is going to be $150,000 better than Nathan Cleary? I think he probably won't be. I mean, the plus there is that he probably won't play Origin, but the minus there is that Hynes, he does have a bye very soon. So if you buy him for this week and then there's a bye next week. Whereas Cleary gets that 78 points. He dropped about $20,000 last week. He's got Canberra this week, who are a little softer in terms of an opponent there. Cleary could be one of the buys of the week, especially if he backs out that performance from last week. The concern with Cleary is that maybe Penrith's attack is going to struggle a little bit without Coruscant and kick-out. But even last week in that loss against Parramatta, he posted 78 points without really dominating in attacking stats. So Cleary's obviously a really solid buy, and I think this might be the cheapest we see him all season. So that could be really interesting as a buy. I'm going through the rest of the list. Zach Hosking is the other guy to talk about there. So Hosking gets the starting role at number 12. We see Luke Garner out of the team getting arrested. He's got a bit of a niggle, but also Hosking just absolutely dominated. And he scored about 90 points last week. He's also only $541,000. So, he's already in 2.3% of teams. I'd say a lot of people are buying him right now. But Hosking could be that guy. If you back the talent on Hosking at $541,000, obviously a low break even, he made 50-plus tackles, and I think he missed one or something like that last week as well. So he's just got a great work rate. If you can play 80 minutes, then he is one of the buys of the week. The rest of the team, I mean, there's a few guys to keep an eye on. Tyrone Peachy comes onto that bench. He probably won't be fantasy relevant there, but he may play a bit of a middle role for Penrith, which is kind of interesting. Probably plays hooker this week with Sonny Luke out of the team. Jim Salmon can sort of float around that too, but yeah, Peachy probably comes on as a bit of an injection of talent in hooker, and I think he's too talented to be in reserve grade Peachy, so he might end up a middle forward off the bench at some point. Outside of that, Taruva had a good game. If you started with Taruva, you'd be pretty happy with that performance as well. So let's roll into the next game here. We got the Rabbitohs and the Storm, and this is pretty juicy in terms of real NRL. But for fantasy, there isn't too much to talk about here. For the Rabbitohs backline, I wouldn't touch most of it. Isaac Thompson, he's not really passed the eye test in terms of NRL performances so far. He's had some pretty good games for fantasy, a couple of 30-plus games, a couple of games in the teens, but he's probably a guy that you have to hold until he either gets dropped or until he has some big games and makes you some money. He's still floating around that 300 sort of marker. Outside of that, I wouldn't really touch the Rabbitohs halves. I don't think they're worth it. The rest of the back line, I mean, Campbell Graham's interesting. He probably plays Origin, though, so Probably wouldn't take him. Latrell Mitchell, he's been carrying a few little injuries. Probably not a guy to go for. The South forward pack's a little more interesting. Damien Cook's in great form. He's dropped down to about $872,000. So he's always really solid. He's been performing well. Fantasy, Kaloa Matangi, great form. He played in the middle last week, which is a bit weird, but he's back to the edge where he belongs. He has scored a couple of tries this year, so you can't really count on that all the time. And then Cam Murray as well. And Cam Murray's been sort of a bit hit and miss so far, but obviously a gun. Probably not my number one gun to target this week. I'd take Cleary over Cam Murray right now. And then for the Storm, we've got Warbrick, Will Warbrick. He's got 64 points. He went up about $50,000. He is a perfect example of when you have a cheap base price player, you need to hold them until they do something that means you have to drop them. So here, Warbrick, talk about Calm Pereira soon. But these guys, they just need a couple of big games to jump up in price and you can sell them. So Warbrick's a winger for the Storm. Hold on to him until his price levels out and then you can look at moving him on. Outside of that, Pezet's a trap. Jerome Hughes will be back soon. Don't buy Pezet. Cam Munster, he's sort of thereabouts, but there's some other halves around the same price. Again, I just think Cleary is about the same price, so you can go get Cleary instead. Harry Grant, same price as for Cook there, about $880,000. Harry Grant's juicy. He didn't have the best game last week, about 51 points, but he's just going to be there all year. But at the same time, Cook and Robson are probably less likely to play Origin. So if you're thinking long game, a Reece Robson might be a better option than both these guys. Going down the list, Eli Katoa. How good has Eli Katoa been? Absolutely sensational. Another 59-point game. He had a couple of try assists in that 59 points, so the base wasn't all there for that one. And Loyera had a pretty good game as well. And then Josh King. Might be a bit late to grab Josh King at this stage, but he's producing some decent scores, or at least he did last week with about 69 points. Rolling through these teams here, so Seagulls and the Knights next. And look, a lot of people bought Tom Trbojevic last week. Tommy got 36 points. I would not be worried about that at all. Turbo got 36 points in a game where he had basically no attacking stats. He had that try disallowed with the really dodgy forward pass ball. Turbo's a guy that, he's going to score you 30 sometimes. He's going to score you 80 sometimes. He's going to average probably around that 50 mark. And at 650,000 odd, he's underpriced. So I wouldn't be rushing to get him in necessarily. But I did buy him last week, and I'm very happy with him in my team there, and he probably should destroy the Knights this week as well. The Knights have leaked some points so far this year. On the other side, Lachie Miller in the fullback battle there. Lachie Miller's going from strength to strength, and it's a little concerning that so much of his stats do rely on those full field tries to get big scores, but he's super talented, he's super quick, and he's being fed opportunities by these other players in the Knights team. So if you have Lachie Miller, you're stoked. If you're looking to buy him, he's not that expensive yet. You're probably going to make money on him. I'm iffy on it, but he's not a bad buy if you're looking to buy him in right now. You've missed the mark a little bit in terms of timing, but he's pretty juicy. Greg Marzhew as well for the Knights in number 5 jersey. He had a great game too. He's rock solid. I don't think the Knights will feed him enough opportunities to make him worthwhile in fantasy, personally. But you could make a case. I mean, he had a massive score last week, and he is a massive pod. But if I was choosing between Marzhew and Miller, I'd probably take Miller just in terms of the involvement. Miller's polling massive meters every week, and he's been great. Outside of that, there's a bit of talk that Ruben Garrick could be moving to center. So just keep that in mind if you're ever looking at Ruben Garrick. Probably not for fantasy, but him at center would not be as good. He's not going to get as many of those fall-over tries. He'll still be a goal kicker, obviously. Daly Cherry Evans, jumping back to Manly. He had a pretty good game last week. He's obviously a gun. I would take Cleary over Cherry Evans if I was buying a gun half this week, but you can't go wrong with Cherry Evans. And then rolling through the forward pack, for the Seagulls, I'm not really interested in any of it. Karl Lawton was there last week, and he had a great game, so he would have been interesting, but Lockie Croker's been named this week, so keep an eye on Lawton, I guess, if Croker got hurt, but no need to get him right now. Outside of that, I mean, Shaun Keppie's been sort of rising in price. He was one we talked about last week. It's too late now, I'd say, for Shaun Keppie, and even then it was a bit dodgy to get him last week as well. In this Knights pack, Frizzell is pretty cheap right now. He had that game that was affected by injury where he got hurt in about 15th minute. He had a great game last week with about 60 points. You could take on Frizzell there. Outside of that, Jaden Brayley is another one. Actually, this probably deserves a bit of a look into his profile. Yeah, minus $81,000 so far from Jaden Brayley. So you get 59 points last week. You got $614,000 is pretty cheap there. 1% owned. Look, Jaden Brayley could be a juicy option there. He dropped 28K last week. Probably won't drop that much more money. You might get him for maybe 600,000 next week, but Brayley's a decent little money-making option there, actually, where you can get a 50 average for $614,000. So that could be juicy. I wouldn't touch Jack Johns, personally. There's just that many guys that are floating around that role. Even when Adam Elliott comes back, you got Kurt Mann floating around. You got some better middle forwards on the bench as well. I just wouldn't go there, and the PPM's not there either. Next game here, we've got the Dragons and the Dolphins. This is a juicy matchup in real life because the Dolphins copped their first loss last week. Can they bounce back is the question. Let's start with the Dragons here because they also copped a bit of a beating last week against the Sharks. It's very late to be getting on Tyrell Sloan, but if you own him already, you copped a bit of a low score last week. Don't worry about it. That was a game where they got destroyed. He's going to have more opportunities in coming weeks. So keep Tyrell Sloan if you have him. Don't buy him if you don't. Outside of that, going down this list, I'm not that interested in the backline or the halves. Ben Hunt, he really relies on tries to score points in fantasy, so you probably don't want that in your half spot. Going into the forward pack, Jack Bird's an interesting one. He got moved to the bench at the last minute for Zane Musgrove and only played a small number of minutes. Cronulla jumped out to a big lead in that game, so I don't think it was an effective strategy. I don't think Jack Bird being on the bench was the reason they got blown out, but I think they'll want to start Jack Bird going forward, and I think they want him to play big minutes. So, yeah, I wouldn't worry if you have Bird. If you don't have Bird, maybe just keep an eye on it and just see what they do this week. But I'm pretty confident Bird will go back to his big minutes role. For the Dolphins, if you got Hamiso, you're really happy. He's doing well. It's too late to buy him. The base stats historically haven't been there. He's done it so far this year, but I'm a bit concerned about everyone on this Dolphins team without Shaun O'Sullivan there. So Sullivan, out of all players who are not hookers picking up the ball at dummy half, Shaun O'Sullivan had more touches than anyone. And I think part of what he was doing there was really just steering the team and just taking all those first touches to make sure that guys like Katoa, Hamiso, and either Marshall King or whoever they have at hooker could just play their own roles while O'Sullivan really shouldered the burden of steering the team. They've now got Anthony Milford in that role, and it's going to take some time to adjust, so I could see Hamiso maybe having a couple of lower games in the coming month. But if you have him, I mean, St. George are a softer opposition, so he should do well this week, but not a guy to buy. Then going down the list, Asako, Aitken, Branko Lee, all not guys to buy. Jack Bostock, he isn't in fantasy yet, which is interesting, but he's going to be a guy that I'll be keeping an eye on. He potentially could get some serious time as well, with Tessinu out for a decent amount of time with an MCL strain. Then we've got the forward pack. Don't think about Hoeneß Ese. Tommy Gilbert, probably a bit capped out. He's not getting enough minutes to really be a top flight gun, so I wouldn't be rushing Gilbert in. Connelly Lemuelu is really interesting. He had a massive game last week. I think he posted about 48 points. Still very mid 400s sort of price there. Valuable at center. I mean, he's a guy that I'm probably going to be buying this week. I wanted to get him last week, but I just didn't have space for him. So, yeah, he's in this week. He only went up a small amount last week because of that injury he had that led to an 8-point score. All right, rolling through the next game here, Broncos and Tigers. Real juicy. For the Broncos, I mean, I've seen a lot of teams with guys like Katoni Staggs, Ezra Mam, Reece Walsh. These guys all really rely on attacking stats. And if you have them, you hold on. They're versing the Tigers this week. So there should be plenty of opportunities for attacking stats. But I wouldn't be rushing to get a guy like Staggs in or even Ezra or Walsh at this stage, personally, just because they're so reliant on attacking stats. And if they have a game where they don't get those attacking stats, you're going to get a score between 15 and 25. So for my style, personally, they're not as much of a fit. If I was going to get one of them, it'd be Reece Walsh, just in terms of his involvement in the attack, and he's a part of everything. Adam Reynolds, he had a tough game. He was on about 5 points after about 50 minutes, which is crazy. He got up to about 32 points in the end. He had that try assist and a few other attacking plays. But yeah, with Reynolds, I wouldn't be worried too much about that. It was a bit of an outlier game. If you've bought Reynolds, you're probably holding on to Reynolds, although actually now I can see a case for it. I mean, if your team is perfect and you can go Reynolds to Cleary, not the worst thing in the world to do. I probably wouldn't be moving Reynolds on for a Shaun Johnson, though, or a Dylan Brown or one of these types of players, because it feels a bit sideways. And look, Reynolds is going to average in that low 50s sort of area. So you're not going to gain that much. He's going to have his big games, but if you can upgrade into a genuine gun like Cleary or Hynes, that's kind of interesting. Going to the forward pack, we've got, Payne, Haas, Pat Carrigan. They're both going from strength to strength. If you own them, keep them. If you don't, I'm not in a rush to buy them. There's also, the idea of things like Origin for Payne Haas there in particular as well. You can grab them. They're good guns to get, but there are some other guys we talked about as well that could be more interesting options. And for the Tigers here, what's really interesting in the Tigers team is this back row pairing. So Isaiah Papali'i, John Bateman, both scored in the 70s last week. Really juicy scores in a loss as well, and not relying heavily on attacking stats. So, I mean, they're both guys who sort of transcend situation, and they get so involved. They get hands on the ball so much. They do the work in defense. Bateman in particular was a very active defender last week. You can look at those guys. I mean, they're both massive pods. Like, let's get them now, actually. So Papali'i, $857,000. Yeah, 5% owned. I would say there's not that many serious teams that have Papali'i, though, because he had that suspension. And John Bateman, 0.4% owned. So Bateman's a guy who was a top 10 sort of fantasy scorer at times in his career when he was at Canberra. Could be a juicy option for you. I'm not saying get him, but he's another one of those guys like Hudson Young where if you grab him, he could blow your season up or he could catapult you into a really good position. So up to you if you take the risk. Coruscant had a really tough game. He scored that try, still only scored in the low 40s. That wasn't great for him, but the work rate has been there in previous games, so I wouldn't be panicking if I had Coruscant. I didn't buy him, but I did think about him last week. And if you have him, keep him there. He'll do well. I mean, it's probably interesting to watch what Simpkin does here, but with the way that bench is structured, I would be very surprised if we didn't see Simpkin and Coruscant on the field at the same time, because Stafford Tohu's there. You got Twal, he's obviously a big minute guy, but then Matamua. Yeah, I think Simpkin's going to play that sort of lock role with Coruscant on the field at the same time. Next game here, Sharkies, who are on fire with Nicho Hynes back, and the Warriors, who are killing it this year. Look, for Nicho Hynes, $1 million now. He scored massive last week. I was up against Hynes in practically every draft league I'm in, which was the worst thing in the world, because in fantasy, if you scored anything other than 90 points, I was good, but he managed to get 100. So, yeah, that hurts. But look, Nicho, if you can get Nicho, he's a bit of a pod right now. Not many people have him. I wouldn't be destroying my team to get him, obviously, because he has that bye next week. So you're buying him for this week. He misses next week. Give it a week and then wait through that bye and then look at him after that. Don't be buying Nicho Hynes right now. But if you do want to buy Nicho Hynes, it may work for you this week. For the backline of the Sharks, no matter what they do, I wouldn't really touch any of them. They're all guys who can get some attacking stats, but they're not fantasy scorers. That includes Moylan there as well. So everyone except Hynes, probably not touching them. In the forward pack, I mean, the Cora started hot, but there are some better options there than the Cora, I think, that we can go for. Going to McInnes is interesting. Don't buy McInnes, but keep an eye on McInnes because at some point in the season, he may get minutes. So Dale Finucane might get injured. McInnes might go back to that 60, 70-minute role where he's a guy who can average 50 to 60 points and he's going to be well underpriced because right now he's playing about 30 minutes a game. So just keep an eye on McInnes. Charles Clockstad had a great game last week. He's a guy, if you own him, obviously hold on to him. Don't cash out early. If you're buying a player, not the worst in the low 400s, but I probably wouldn't be rushing him in. Volkman, don't take him. Tamari Martin has a head knock. I'd expect him to be back very soon. And Volkman hasn't shown that fantasy prowess, personally, for me, especially alongside Shaun Johnson, who's kicking the ball more than anyone in the game, basically. Shawnee J, monster performance. He was struggling a bit early on. He had that try assist early in the game that sort of bumped him up a bit. The kick meters started to come, and then he scored that try that was a little contentious. I think it was a try, personally. He grabbed that try. He grabbed a massive score. If you have Shaun Johnson, you're stoked. He's still under $700,000, which is interesting. Now's probably the last week you can get on Shaun Johnson before he becomes really pricey for what he is. So if you think Shaun can keep this up, and if his stat structure stays the same as what it is now, then he is serious value. But if the Warriors regress at all, or he regresses back or picks up an injury or something like that, then there may be some risk there as well. Going to the back line, I mean, Tohu Harris had that injury last week. He's named again this week. I'm a bit suspect on this one. If I had Tohu Harris, I might look at trading him. We need more news on that injury, really. We need to sort of hear about the captain's run as well. But I think that injury could hamper him a bit. It's a knee injury. He's not a young guy. He was relying on playing 80 minutes. So once you get that injury, you've got Jazz Tavanga playing good footy off the bench. His minutes might go down this week, or he might not even play this week. Jackson Ford, real juicy. Jackson Ford's $383,000. So he had that concussion in the first minute in round 2. That slowed his price rises down, but he posted a massive score last week in the 60s. $383,000. He's probably my favorite pick of the guys in the 300s for this week, if you're going to look to buy someone in that price range. So yeah, Jackson Ford. Go get Jackson Ford if you don't have Jackson Ford, because he looks locked in. I was suspect at the start of the year when Josh Curran was on the bench that he might take the minutes, but Jackson Ford seems to be that guy for the Warriors, and he's playing fantastic footy. Then we got the Dogs and the Cowboys. And there's a few different traps in these teams, but a few decent options as well. It's too late to go get Hayes Perham, I think, now. He's going all right, but yeah, if you had him, you'd be happy. It's a bit late to go buy him. Karaz is still a pod. He's a guy where if you back the Bulldogs and you back the talent, then Karaz is going well. He's one of those guys that could win you the league or cost you, I think, as well. But he's got a great base, so he's pretty solid as far as wing fullbacks go. Alamotti, you'd be happy with him. 30 points in a game where he didn't do too much last week. So I'm still happy with him. I'll probably start him again this week. Matt Burton has struggled a bit. He went back to some lower run meters last week, which was a bit concerning as a Matt Burton owner. His kick meters were up. Again, we just need to see him sort of dominating a bit more. That's the problem for Matt Burton there. And then going through here, the forward pack, I mean, I wouldn't worry about too many of these guys here. If you've got Preston, keep Preston. I wouldn't be rushing like Sutton, King, Fatal Mariner, kick out any of those guys in. Just because last week they had a few injuries, so Max King played a lot more minutes than he was planning to, and he posted a 60-point score. But I think he's priced around what he's worth. Reed Marnie, if you have him, it was just a bit of an outlier game last week. He sort of struggled, but I think he'll be okay going forward. And this Cowboys forward pack is a little weak as well this week without Reuben Cotter, and now without Jeremiah Nanai as well. On the Cowboys side of things, Tom Chester has one more week. Don't buy Tom Chester. Brendan Elliott, he's been in teams a lot of times, and there's a reason he's priced where he's priced. I don't personally want to go near Brendan Elliott. I think he's got a low base and probably not the talent to spike up for fantasy, but if you need a cash out, I wouldn't be taking him. For the halves, Tom Geard and Chad Townsend, again, two guys probably not getting for fantasy. In the forward pack, McLean and Neem, not that keen. Reece Robson didn't have the best game last week, but he's still rock solid. He's making a lot of tackles, playing good minutes. I'm not stressed about Reece. If you have Reece, awesome. If you're looking to buy a hooker, I wouldn't let last week's low score dissuade you. Reece is still a great guy to have. Lukey here as well. So Lukey's priced pretty cheap. He nabbed a 38-point game last week in 57 minutes. Lukey's a guy that you can get in that mid-range category as well. Very similar to Lemuelu for me. So he's sort of in that category of players where he's on the edge, decent work rate, playing for a pretty good team, could score some tries. I mean, he was a bit of a try scorer when he was playing last year. he's not the worst guy to have, and he's got really good buys too. So what you're asking yourself with a guy like Lukey is, do you think he's going to keep the starting spot? And that question is, look, Jeremiah Nano is obviously their number one back rower, but Cohen Hess, I think Lukey's better than Cohen Hess. And then the other question is, Luciano Leilua, when does he come back, and does that have an impact on Lukey there? Does he come straight back into the side, or is that court case going to keep him out for a long time? I don't know. But look, Lukey is a pretty hot option here anyway, so you couldn't go wrong with Lukey. And they're the team list for today. So, yeah, look, round 5 coming up. Let me know in the comments how you went in fantasy last week and what trades you're looking at this week. And I'll see you on the other videos. We'll have some pods videos, look at buy, hold, sells. And we're also going to look at captains too in the coming days. So looking forward to seeing you there. And we'll catch you on the next one.